Over to you, Damian. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks very much, Dickon. And I'm glad to see so many people on the call. Glad that there's a sort of genuine community behind this push. We will all violently agree with each other on what we're trying to achieve. So I won't go into that, but I'll take very much the point that JC made at the end of his presentation about the interaction between commercial decisions and political decisions. So I'll talk about the national political push that I'm trying to get forward and hope that the government will get on board with. As Dickon has said, I held a debate on this very issue in Parliament towards the end of last year, which was replied to in a reasonably positive way by the Rail Minister, Hugh Merriman, who happily for us is a reasonably local MP, being just over the border in East Sussex. So he absolutely gets the point about services from Ashford. And he, in the debate, said all the right things, but I obviously don't want to leave it there. I think it's important that we keep the pressure up. So I wrote to him afterwards with a series of specific requests, and I'll do a subbed down version of what he said to me, two or three points in it. He said that he'd met Eurostar CEO Gwendolyn Kaznev in November, where the topic of Kent stations was on the agenda. He emphasised the importance of the company continuing to engage constructively with Kent stakeholders. And I asked him as well about the potential competitors that people have talked about, including Evelyn, which has publicised its intentions to launch services in competition with Eurostar, and he welcomes the prospect for competition and the benefits this will bring, not least increasing the prospects of restoring services to Kent, and ends with a formal but warm line about grateful for my continued campaigning on the matter, which he knows is appreciated by stakeholders across Kent, and more importantly, looks forward to continuing to work with you to achieve the goal of seeing the return of international services in Kent, which is quite a decent commitment. But again, in recent weeks, I have put down some parliamentary questions to try and make sure that the subject stays high on the agenda inside the Department for Transport. And the last answer I had, which was to a question I tabled last week, said that he had most recently met with Eurostar since his letter to me, and he's emphasised the UK government's desire to see the return of international services at Ebbsfleet and Ashford as soon as reasonably possible, and says his officials have and will continue to engage regularly with Eurostar on this matter and press for the reinstatement of services at Kent stations once it's commercially viable for them to do so. So in time-honoured fashion, that leaves the government facing in the right direction, but also with the get out of Eurostar deciding its commercial viability. And that, I think, is the crux of the matter, and why I want to keep pushing on this through Parliament, because clearly the government wants our station back as much as we do, but in the end, they're going to leave it to Eurostar to take a commercial decision. And I think there are various levers that we can push on this. The main one of which is the amount of taxpayers' money that's gone into building the stations in the first place. And most specifically for Ashford, the fact that they spent 8 million on the new signalling, the Ashford Spurs project, which allowed the new generation of Eurostar trains to come into Ashford, a project that, with terrible irony, was completed in March 2020, just as international services was stopped because of COVID. But it's still there, it still worked, and it's still, at the moment, it's taxpayers' money completely down the drain. And I would hope that the British government would not want that to remain the case. I think on the time scale, we haven't discussed that yet. I think it's worth thinking about, of when we can realistically expect these services to come back, because it's pretty clear that Eurostar's commercial viability has improved again. As it happened, I took a Eurostar from St Pancras a couple of weeks ago, and was struck by how full both the train and the waiting rooms were. It's clearly, as we know, a popular service that people want to use. I think, frankly, being realistic about it, we know that the new EU immigration system, the EES system, is coming in October this year, and nobody will want to do anything to put that at risk. So, as I say, being realistic, I don't think any decision is going to be made until after that system has been introduced and settled down, because you may well have seen that even just with St Pancras, HS1 is putting out some fairly hairy predictions that unless they get more gates open and more space and more customs officers and immigration officers rather in the entrance hall, then there will be queues halfway around the Euston Road and most of North London if they try and run all their trains. So they will want to see that that's all been resolved before they bring back the full scale operation using all the other stations, including Ashford. So, I mean, that doesn't mean we shouldn't keep pushing, obviously, through the course of this year. But I do think, therefore, that one of the constructive things that we can all do over the next few months is make contact with potential competitors, because I think that will be clearly a cloud on Eurostar's horizon, that the prospect of competition will normally sharpens anyone's mind quite a lot. And clearly, one of the comparative advantages, either for Eurostar or a competitor, will be to able to offer a full range of services where attracting customers to where they want to leave from, which in this case, showing that survey, there are thousands of people who would prefer to leave from Ashford. And in the end, we're going to have to convince Eurostar that there are enough of them that they will run a profitable service from there. They are in a position where if they wanted to, they could resist political pressure. I think they won't want to. And I think one of the things that makes me more optimistic now than I was in the early sort of post-COVID months, as it were, is that relations between the UK government and the French government are much better than they were in 2021. And to put it very, very simplistically, but not inaccurately, Rishi gets on with Macron a lot better than Boris did. And the French governmental system is extremely centralized. And if the president is looking benignly on something, then you're much more likely to get all arms of the French state acting in a positive way. And we've seen some practical advantages of that at Dover, as it happens, in one of the holiday periods where suddenly there were far more booths open than there had been previously. And so I think that's a lever we can use to say that this is something that the British government would very much want. If we can show that it's commercially advantageous to a French state-owned rail operator, then it will be a no-brainer to reopen the stations. So, as I say, I think we should use the lever of potential competition, obviously both with the competitors themselves, but also with Eurostar, and have a realistic target of bringing the services back as soon as we can after the EES system settles down in October this year. I'll stop there so I can give some time for questions.
Thank you very much, Damian. That's really useful. In fact, you've covered off a number of the questions that I would have asked. But one of the questions that I have got is in terms of level playing field for competitors, because obviously that's important to attract the competitors in. Obviously, we've got things like the photometric booths at St Pancras, which I know that Eurostar were talking about. And at one point, I think they were sort of talking about capping passenger numbers or something if they didn't get a certain number of photometric booths. So my question really is around, are you happy at the moment that we have things in place to allow competitors to come in as easily as possible? I mean, a question around sort of whether there's proprietary technology that or systems that Eurostar own that would then make it more difficult for competitors to come in and put in place customs processing, etc. In terms of a second part to that question, really is in terms of access charges, because obviously we have HS1 and we have GetLink, you know, who I think are excellent companies, but obviously they are in a position to charge, you know, in accordance with their requirements. So that sort of question of level playing field side of things, really.
Yeah, I think the two questions run together because you know, logically, both HS1 and GetLink should want as many operators as possible using their infrastructure. You know, make your assets sweat is a pretty basic business decision. And at the moment, there are lots of train paths not used on HS1 and through the tunnel. So they should both want to act as facilitators of competition coming in. And I know HS1 better than I know GetLink for obvious reasons, but HS1 I think are very keen, and I think I'm right in saying have been cooperating with the work done on the business study as a sort of gesture of goodwill that they would like to help the Kent stations come back. In terms of proprietary technology, as far as I'm aware, but there will be others who are greater experts on rail technology than me on this call, that the as it were the infrastructure that allows trains to run will not be Eurostar's, will belong to other people. So I mean, clearly all the technical standards would need to be met by any competitor, and safety is always a huge thing on the railways and can often cause quite long delays before anything new happens. But I don't think there would be any insurmountable barriers there. I mean, there will be practical points to make about if you've got people running competing timetables, is the current setup at St Pancras big enough? Even before you add demands for PAF officers, immigration officers from the French authorities at Ashford, and I suspect the answer at St Pancras would be no. So they would need to do some quite radical work there, and in practical terms, close a few of the shops and make them part of the entrance hall. But we could certainly obviously cope with anything like that at Ashford. So that should act as an attraction to people, if anything.
Thank you for that answer. I mean, obviously, as capacity comes under more pressure at St Pancras, obviously the argument for using completely unused capacity at Ashford and Ebbsfleet is becoming stronger, of course. I think Bushra's got a question from one of our audience.
That's right. So this is a common question we get asked by a lot of our supporters. So if the government is truly wanting the services back, why did it not support Eurostar during the pandemic and allow shares in Eurostar to be sold?
I mean, I know Eurostar always says they got no support from the British government during the pandemic. I'm sitting in the House of Commons, so I'll use the House of Commons terms, slightly disingenuous in that they did, of course, get all the furlough money for their UK operatives that others were getting. So they did get millions of pounds of British taxpayers' money. And I know, because I've had this argument with them, they've always argued that they should have had the same level of subsidy as other transport operators. There is the slight problem that they are, well, there is 50% plus owned by SNCF. So in the end, they are an arm of the French state. And I think if the British government had given British taxpayers money to the French government during COVID, there would have been not unreasonable objections to that was at a time when we as a country were spending literally hundreds of billions of pounds supporting our own people to basically get them through when their work had been compulsorily taken away from them. If we were spending millions on top of that, just handing it over to the French government, I think, as I say, there would have been objections to that, and I don't think those objections would have been unreasonable.
Thank you.
Sure. So a question about Eurostar and their strategy. Obviously, they've merged with Thales, so they have, and we've seen that their strategy is definitely city to city focused. Obviously, that's the most attractive part of their business. There was a statement from Gwendolyn Cazenave last year, I think July, in Financial Times, saying that they would be focusing on their city routes, but also saying that they wouldn't be considering either Ashford or Ebbsfleet, restoring services at Ashford or Ebbsfleet, until they cleared their debts. And there were some other conditions, but the debts are obviously a significant factor for them, or they're stating that they are a significant factor. I think end of 2022, they had something like over 900 million pounds worth of debts. Obviously, as you say, they're doing quite well, so they're clearing debts down. I think I saw a figure for 100 to 125 million a year or something like that. But even given that, it could take sort of 6 or 7 years for them to completely clear the debts. So with that sort of stated position, their obvious prioritization of city to city, what's your sort of approach going forward in terms of it would seem to me that, and probably other people, that obviously the focus should be on competitors, encouraging, enabling. So what sort of levers can we pull in terms of helping ourselves to get Ashford and Ebbsfleet services back with competitors?
I mean, the theology of French railways has always been that high-speed rail should be big city to big city. They always thought it was a peculiar English eccentricity that we wanted to stop high-speed trains and make them a bit slower to stop them in other communities. And that still is writ large in their thinking. So how can we persuade them to accept again the English eccentricity as they see it? I mean, I think there are two. One is deep encouragement from the British government that this would help all round and would smooth other things. And as I say, we've got lip service is too unfair. We have got public commitments to that from the British government, but they've not started putting the arm on yet. And I think, as I say, after October, that may be the time to start doing that. But the other one is the commercial point. And you make the point that last summer she was saying that they were going to have to pay the debts off completely, and actually the sort of public statements have got a bit softer since then, and a bit more encouraging for us. So I think the other lever we can pull is the demonstration of commercial viability. That actually, if they can make money from Ashford and Ebbsfleet, then that enables them to pay their debts down faster. So we're not asking them to provide a subsidized social service. We're actually saying this is in your commercial interest. And in a sense, it's a message that they never want to hear, because they would much rather run, London, Paris, and so on. But nevertheless, if we can plausibly demonstrate that this is a way they can become financially more healthy, then any sensible company would do that.
Absolutely, yeah. So final sort of question. In terms of what are the sort of major obstacles at the moment that you see to getting services back at Ashford and Ebbsfleet? If you had to pick out sort of 2 or 3 of the biggest obstacles that we've got at the moment, all of us, to getting services back, what would those sort of 2 or 3 obstacles be? And what do you think would be a reasonable approach to removing those blocks?
I mean, the most immediate obstacle is the uncertainty over how immigration into the EU will cope with the new EES system. And in a sense, there's not a lot we can do about that. But with other parts of my brain, as it were, I'm part of a group of Kent MPs who are lobbying very hard to make sure that Dover doesn't seize up completely in October, not least for the interest of everyone trying to travel on motorways in Kent, which is another transport issue that occupies a large part of my thinking and time. So that I think is hugely important, that we actually have a smooth system of movement between England and France and back again. That's one obstacle, but we can't do much about that. The other obstacle is the making clear, not least to the British government, how important the Kent stations are to wider economic growth in throughout the second most profitable region of the British economy, which is the southeast. That actually this isn't just a problem for communities in Ashford and around Ebbsfleet. It actually really affects business in particular, and therefore growth across a larger area of the southeast. I think that's quite an important task we can set ourselves to try and demonstrate. And the third one, I would say, is just diplomacy, to the extent of keeping it high high enough on the agenda of transport ministers that they, in the end, they get fed up of being nagged about it. That's why I didn't just hold the debate and forget it. I've gone back, and I've gone back again, and I will go back again, so that the transport ministers who are telling me all the right words actually turn those words into action. I think that's a sort of key task for the rest of this year. And it's obviously I can act as a point person for that. But the more convincing evidence we've got from different parts, from local authorities, from businesses, from individual people who know about railways, all the people who are speaking tonight, the more we can speak with one voice, the more likely we are to achieve a successful effect.
Well, thank you very much, Damian, for your participation this evening. Really appreciate that, and thank you for taking time to answer the questions. I understand that you've got to leave and go to another engagement now, but thank you very much for that. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.